All right, I think we've waited long enough for professors and students to scurry from the classes they were just teaching or listening to or sleeping through. We don't know. Um, so I guess with this, I'd like to welcome you all to season 3 of the Revelation Reception Network seminar series. I'm here representing some of my co-organizers who have some are able to join today, some are not able to join, but Tom Schmidt is here, and then Cristian Cardoso from Medellin. He is not present today, and then also Régis Brunet at the Catholic University in Louvain, Louvain in Wallonie in Belgium. So we're very pleased to start this new series together. And just a quick word to those of you who haven't been here before. This network, this seminar started just because there were a few of us who were working actually during the pandemic on our dissertations. And it turns out that we were all working on reception of the Book of Revelation in late antiquity. That was Christian and Martina Vercesi. And we thought, oh, wow, wouldn't it be a cool idea if we met up with more of these people? And so kind of this network spontaneously formed through conversation. Just for fun, we started doing this seminar series, and it's really grown from there. So the network is really meant just to provide, is meant to be a network. It is not an organization, it is merely a network meant to facilitate collaboration on people working on the reception of Book of Revelation. We've set up a listserv to facilitate this. We're on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, X, we're on YouTube. The session is being recorded today. And what we're trying to do is just facilitate the study of the Book of Revelation in its many interesting ways as it's been done throughout history. A lot of us do our work in late antiquity, but we are intrepidly trying to push as deep into modernity or as shallow into modernity, depending on your perspective. And so we have here Lynn Huber, who will be presenting later in the series, and she will be talking about 19th and 20th century American reception. We have Sam Pomeroy, who will be working on reception of the idea of heavenly Jerusalem in 20th century German theology. So we have a lot of good stuff coming up. We're really excited about it, and we're really glad that you guys are along for the ride. As usual, we'll be having our presenter give a talk today, 35 minutes, and then we'll be having a Q&A after that. With that, I might have a few closing comments, just housekeeping things. Otherwise, it's normal, so I will hand over the session to Tom Schmidt from Fairfield University, and he will moderate this session and introduce our speaker. Thanks, Tom.
I am delighted to introduce to you all John Lamoreaux. He's professor at Southern Methodist University in the Religious Studies Department. He received his PhD from Duke University, and he has wide-ranging interests in Greek, in Syriac, in Arabic. I have benefited enormously from his translation of John Stathopoulos and the Dionysian corpus. I've been fascinated by his Theodore Abu Qura work and his work on Hunayn ibn Ishaq and the Galen translation of Hunayn. Those of you who aren't into Arabic Christianity, those are two luminaries in Arabic Christian tradition, and many other things that John has done. Today, he's going to be talking about the apocalypse and the doctrine of the Antichrist in the Greek Church, circa 200 to 1100. This is a topic that I have great interest in, and I'm very much looking forward to what Dr. Lamoreaux has to share with us. So, Dr. Lamoreaux, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Congratulations on your new book, by the way. Well done. So I'll pull up the slides in just a second. It is, in fact, my interest in stuff Arabic that got me into this topic. Not Christian Arabic in this case, but Muslim Arabic apocalyptic material. They have an Antichrist figure in Islam. Jesus returns as well. And I was desperate to try to find some sources for the Islamic doctrine. So Nothing in the Syriac tradition. Ended up spending some time with Greek tradition, nothing in the Greek tradition, but the Greek tradition turned out to be super, super interesting. At any rate, what I'm going to talk about is the Greek doctrine of the Antichrist. Forgive me, Greek antichristology, if we have such a thing. The particular doctrine I'm going to discuss is first attested in the 2nd century, late 2nd century, and persists all the way up. Sort of the last text to attest to it is from the late 11th century. So it's lasts for over 1,000 years. And during that 1,000 years, there is almost no change to the doctrine. This doctrine was preached from the pulpits by the bishops. It was taught in catechesis. This is not an apocryphal marginal tradition. It's something that stands squarely within the center of the theological tradition of the Greek Byzantine Church. It arises under a persecuting Roman Empire and persists up until the point that the empire is thoroughly Christian, but again, with few, if any, significant changes. All right, let me go ahead and pull up some slides here. So the authors that attest to this tradition, there are 8 of them, starting with Irenaeus, writing around 175 and ending with Philip Monotropos or Philip the Solitary in 1095 AD. Let me just briefly run through these, say a few things about these authors, and then we'll turn to the relationship of these texts to one another and to the apocalyptic schema that they share. Y'all probably know Irenaeus, one of the most famous pre-Nicene theologians. His Against All Heresies is a refutation of various forms of early Gnosticism as well as Marcionism. In book 5 of that text, while discussing the nature of evil, Irenaeus digresses to discuss the doctrine of the Antichrist, insofar as the doctrine of Antichrist can illustrate his discussion of the doctrine of evil. Then he digresses from his digression to talk about variant reading in the book of Revelation, where the number of the beast is not 666, but 616. And then he discusses some possible identities for the person being named as the beast. That's our first text. It's not a systematic full presentation of the schema, but it presupposes the entirety of this schema. Our next author is Hippolytus, writing around 200 AD. We don't know much about Hippolytus. One of the thorniest problems of the study of pre-Nicene Christianity is, in fact, the Hippolytus question. Who the heck was this guy? We have an enormous corpus of exegetical works attributed to him. 19th, 20th century scholars have also attributed some anonymous works to him. It is still, there's no consensus as to whether all of these works are written by the same person, whether that person is living in the Eastern Mediterranean or in the West, perhaps in Rome. For our purposes, we don't really need to deal with that. Our 2 texts are certainly by the same person. They are first a tract on the Antichrist, which is Hippolytus receives a letter from a colleague asking certain questions about the Antichrist, and he responds back. It's not a terribly well structured text. It's essentially a florilegium of scriptural sites arranged by topic. His other work is the commentary on Daniel. These 2 works supplement one another in important ways. There's some enormous lacunae on the Antichrist that can only be filled from the commentary on Daniel. It's a complete commentary on Daniel, and much of the 4th and final book of the commentary is devoted to the doctrine of the Antichrist. Our third author is Cyril of Jerusalem, Patriarch of Jerusalem, who was writing around 350. This is prior to his appointment as Patriarch. And this is Sermon 15 or Oration 15 from his catechetical oration. So those who are about to be baptized on Easter, they have to go through a series of catechesis lectures. And one of these is on the doctrine of Christ's return. That oration is largely concerned with the doctrine of the Antichrist. Next, we have 4 texts attributed to the Greek Ephraim. Greek Ephraim to be distinguished from the Syriac Ephraim. The relationship of the Greek works attributed to Ephraim to the Syriac Ephraim, it's quite unclear. These are 4 homilies. They are transmitted in prose form in the Greek manuscript tradition, but they are originally metrical homilies. And through a collation of the manuscripts, you can recover the original metrical form of these homilies. The meter is, in fact, a Syriac meter. So it's either 7 a line consists of 7 syllables with a caesura in the middle, or 8 syllables and 8 syllables. This meter is unknown in the Greek tradition apart from the Greek Ephraim, which suggests that it's being influenced by the Syriac genre madrashe. These are chanted or sung public sermons. As to date, it's really hard to say exactly when he's writing, but he's before Pseudo-Hippolytus, who uses him, so possibly in the 4th, possibly in the 5th century. Next, we have Pseudo-Hippolytus. The text doesn't even actually claim to be written by Hippolytus, but later scribes attributed it to Hippolytus. It takes the work of Hippolytus and Greek Ephraim, weaves them together, and adds some hortatorium material on why, insofar as Christ is about to return, you all should be on your best behavior. Next text is a Kontakion by the famous Byzantine hymnographer, Romanus the Melode. One of his Kontakion is on the second advent of Christ, not primarily about the return of Christ, but instead about the doctrine of the Antichrist. And then John of Damascus, probably you all know him, writing around 750. His exposition of the Orthodox faith is probably the closest thing there is in the Byzantine Church to an official account of Christian doctrine. He devotes a chapter of that work to the doctrine of the Antichrist. And lastly, we have Philip Monotropos, solitary, in his work, The Dioptra, the Mirror. This is a 7,000 line poem in Byzantine political verse, a dialogue between the soul and the body discussing various aspects of Christian doctrine. It's Byzantine political verse. It's written in sort of slightly below the sort of higher register of Greek, and this work is directed towards lay people, educated lay people. As we'll see, it's an incredibly popular work for later authors, and he devotes a sizable section of that text to the doctrine of the Antichrist. Just quickly, these texts are all related to one another. We'll come to the first row later, the sources of our earliest texts, but Irenaeus is used by Hippolytus. Hippolytus, he's got independent sources as well, but he does know Irenaeus's text. We don't know anything about Ephraim's sources or Cyril's sources, but Hippolytus and Ephraim are both used by Pseudo-Hippolytus. Romanus uses Hippolytus commentary, treatise on the Antichrist, and the Greek Ephraim. John of Damascus uses Cyril, and then Philip the Solitary, Ephraim, Romanus, and John. So these texts are, one of the reasons these texts are so similar to one another is because they were all copying from one another. So let's just briefly discuss the shared apocalyptic schema of these texts. All of these texts either have this schema in full or presuppose the full schema. There is no disagreement in any of these texts as to the general course of events, what follows what and when these occur. So the schema is divided into 2 parts. The first is concerned with the rise of the Antichrist. It takes its stand with the Roman Empire, which is identified as the fourth beast of the book of Daniel. As long as the Roman Empire stands, the advent of the Antichrist will not take place. The Roman Empire falls. It's divided into 10 democracies. This is the term that Hippolytus uses. They're not democracies in the classical Greek sense, but they're rather ethnically homogeneous states tied to a particular territory, each ruled by an independent king. These are equated with the 10 horns of Daniel. Once the 10 democracies arises, the little horn arises, and this is the Antichrist. The Antichrist is seen to be, in early texts, seen to be nothing less than the incarnate Satan, or the son of Satan. Later authors describe him instead as an instrument of Satan. He is, not surprisingly, Jewish, from the tribe of Dan. And when he arises, the first thing he's going to do is slay 3 of the 10 kings. And these are the kings of Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. Why Ethiopia is the successor state to the Roman Empire is somewhat unclear to me. The remaining 7 kings submit to the Antichrist, and at this point, the Antichrist commences his reign of 7 years, which brings us to part 2 of the schema. First 3.5 years, the Antichrist feigns piety. He wars against idolatry. He's kind. He's generous. Early on in his reign, Elijah and Enoch appear, and they preach his true identity and warn that Christ is going to return soon. It's during this period that the Antichrist restores the Jews to their traditional homeland and then rebuilds the city of Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem. After 3.5 years, he kills Enoch and Elijah and takes his seat in the temple where he proclaims himself God. The Jews accept him as their Messiah, and because of the miracles, the wonders that the Antichrist performs via sorcery, the Gentiles accept him as God. At the end of this 3.5 year period, this first 3.5 year period, he initiates a universal persecution of Christians. Christians are fleeing from one end of the earth to the other. They're hiding in caves and holes and so on and so forth. Worship in churches ceases. His final 3.5 years are also characterized by upheavals of the natural order, so famine, plague, and so forth. And at the end of his final 3.5 years, Christ's return, and unsurprisingly, the Antichrist and his followers are cast into the fire and the kingdom of God inaugurated. For early authors, that's taken to be a millennial kingdom here on earth. For later authors, it's taken to be a more spiritual kingdom in heaven. To illustrate how important this doctrine is to the Byzantines, the folks who copy almost all of our manuscripts, just take a brief look at how many witnesses are tested for each of these authors. And you can see the pre-Nicene authors don't fare very well. Irenaeus doesn't survive in full in Greek. Hippolytus, commentary on Daniel, barely survived. On the Antichrist, there are 11 manuscripts, but all of these 11, as far as I can tell, are descended from a single exemplar, and that exemplar was mutilated. So at some point in its transmission, Hippolytus was not a very popular text. Cyril's oration on the return of Christ survives as an independent treaty in 12 manuscripts and in 12 other incorporate translations of his works. It's included. Ephraim, a bestseller, 90 plus manuscripts. It's probably a lot more than 90. Many of our manuscript catalogs that are describing the Greek Ephraim, all they say is like there are 38 works or 50 works of Ephraim in this manuscript. They don't say what they are, so it's really difficult to know the total number of copies of these 4 metrical homilies. Pseudo-Hippolytus, 93 manuscripts. Romanus, again, not so popular. He lives on in the hymnography tradition of the Byzantine Church, but not the Kontakia in full. And then bestseller, John of Damascus, 450 plus manuscripts, and Philip Monotropos, 90 manuscripts. These are just Greek manuscripts. Some of these texts are also preserved in Georgian, Armenian, Ethiopic, Slavonic. So Philip Monotropos, over 200 copies of his work in Slavonic. Also an enormous number of copies of Pseudo-Hippolytus in Slavonic. But we don't need to worry about that in this context. All right. Where does this schema come from? As best I can tell, it's derived from a violent reading of the book of Daniel and is largely independent of everything found in the New Testament. I say a violent reading because it's not a natural reading of the text. Not just natural reading according to the standards of modern biblical scholars, but even exegetes within the Antiochian school of exegesis, they could not find this reading there, because they were inclined to read the text in a more historical light. I think what happened here, I mean, originally the 4th beast of Daniel is not the Roman Empire, but it's the Seleucid Empire, and the little horn is Antiochus IV. And there's lots and lots of evidence in Daniel to suggest that this is in fact the case. But I think what happened is that once the Ancient of Days in Daniel comes to be identified with God the Father, and the Son of Man comes to be identified with Christ, and as you'll recall, Daniel, the Son of Man, comes on his throne. There's fire that precedes him. Once these two have been identified as the Father and Son, it's almost inevitable that you have to identify the 4th beast with the Roman Empire, notwithstanding that you're going to have difficulty reconciling this with nearly half of the text. So if we take just as an example, Daniel 11 and 12, the vision of the kings of the south and the north, It's this detailed history of the Seleucids and up until Antiochus IV. To make this text, to make the fourth beast Rome, our authors have to say everything in Daniel 11 up to 1135 is historical. All of it's presented as a prophecy, but everything up to that point is historical. And it's the very next verse 1136. Now we're talking about prophecy. There's no indication in the text that we've gone from historical material to prophetic material. Nonetheless, you've got to do something like this to neutralize everything that does not agree with the identification of the fourth beast with Daniel. It's not from the New Testament. None of this stuff is from the New Testament. We have an apocalyptic section in the synoptics. It's almost impossible. I think it's probably impossible to reconcile this schema with the schema that seems to be proposed in the synoptics. The synoptics are cited in our text in this regard, but only to the extent that the synoptics are themselves dependent on Daniel. It's not from the apocalypse. The apocalypse is almost utterly irrelevant to these texts. Not surprisingly, but some of our authors accepted the canonicity of the apocalypse. Others of them did not. Some cite the apocalypse frequently, others not at all, or just once or twice. The apocalypse is really hard to make any sort of systematic schema out of its apocalyptic material, and there's no way that this schema can be derived from the apocalypse. But like the synoptics, to the extent that the apocalypse uses the book of Daniel, it is sometimes cited to support various points, to illustrate various points of the schema, or in other cases to add color to the schema. Some of our authors in particular are fascinated by the number of the beast, but it's not relevant to the entire schema. Others use the description of the mark of the beast to further illustrate what the nature of the famine is going to be like in the Antichrist's final 3.5 years. There are two possible exceptions to this, or seeming exceptions to this. There's no mention in the book of Daniel of the two witnesses, or any place in Daniel that says Enoch and Elijah can come back during the reign of the little horn. We only have this explicitly anywhere in the Bible in the Apocalypse, in the chapter on the two witnesses. They're not named in the Apocalypse as Enoch and Elijah, but I think both the Apocalypse and our text are drawing on a common source here. Much of the description of the career of the two witnesses it cannot be reconciled with this schema, first off. So I think what's going on here is that it was initially decided that Elijah has to come back before the return of Christ. This has explicit scriptural support in the book of Malachi. And I think then our authors thought, okay, so why is Elijah coming back? Well, he was ascended into heaven in bodily form. Good. All right, great. That's why Elijah's coming back. He's not being resurrected. He's already alive. He's still alive. But then somebody's kind of in the back row raised his hand and said, what about Enoch? He also ascended live into heaven. So, okay, both Enoch and Elijah are going to return before the return of Christ. This is the logic, I think, of this being used to justify the return of Enoch and Elijah. Similar logic we can see actually at work in some of the later manuscripts of Pseudo-Hippolytus. So in the later Greek tradition, John, the Apostle John, is understood to have ascended into heaven. So some later scribes say the two witnesses are Enoch, Elijah, and the Apostle John. The two witnesses are these three. Right. So it's been suggested that the two witnesses are coming, or that Enoch and Elijah are from the two witnesses, but I don't think that could be maintained. Some modern scholars have suggested the Antichrist from the tribe of Dan, that this is dependent on the apocalypse. As you'll recall, Revelation chapter 7, the sealing of the 144,000, it gives a list of the Jewish tribes, 12 tribes, but it doesn't include the tribe of Dan. So some have said this is why these texts decided that the Antichrist would be from the tribe of Dan. I'm not convinced that this is the case. I think there's an internal logic to it. I mean, first off, the Messiah is, or the Antichrist is Jewish, right? He's Jewish. but he can't be from the tribe of Judah because he's a parody of the true Messiah. So he's got to be from one of the other 12 tribes. And I think at that point, our authors just looked in the book of Genesis and read Jacob's blessings on his sons and tried to figure out which of these sons most closely resembles the figure of the Antichrist. And insofar as Dan is described as a serpent and a biter who bites at the heels of horses, I mean, he's the most obvious candidate for the tribe of the Antichrist. So New Testament is not from the Synoptic Gospels. It's not from the Apocalypse. What about Second Thessalonians? One of the earliest datable parts of the New Testament. So probably written around 51 AD. As you recall, Paul receives a message from the church in Thessaloniki say, we're worried that we missed the return of Christ. He came back and we didn't notice. And then Paul writes back saying, look, guys, my brothers, you'll know when Christ returns because first the Antichrist got come. And he says, let me remind you of the stuff I taught you when I was with you. The man of wickedness, the man of the apostate, he's being held back currently, that which holds him back. He just alludes to the main heads of the teaching that he had given them face to face when he was with them in Thessaloniki. Our apocalyptic schema is consistent with what we find in Second Thessalonians. It's not derived from Second Thessalonians, clearly, but it is consistent with it. Come back to that point in a few seconds, a few minutes. So we look at our four earliest texts. What can we discern about their sources? Irenaeus, although he's active during his career as a bishop in the West, in Gaul, he's originally from Asia Minor. He's a student of Polycarp, who was in turn a disciple of the apostles. Much of the material in his Refutation of Heresies is attributed to the presbyters of Asia Minor and or to Polycarp. In discussing the variant reading of the Apocalypse, he appeals to these presbyters. Insofar as Irenaeus, as he's presenting his material on the Antichrist, he's not arguing for it. He presupposes that his readers agree that all this stuff is going to happen. My guess is he's drawing it from the tradition in Antioch. We could probably therefore take this schema back to the mid-2nd century, maybe a little bit earlier. Hippolytus does draw on Irenaeus, but I believe he also has on his desk, as he's writing, a testimony book. He's got a collection of scriptural sites organized by topics. There's lots of indications in his treatise on the Antichrist that this is so. He misattributes verses of prophecy. Sometimes he'll cite verses from two different authors and attributed them to just one of the authors. He's got Sibylline-like material there attributed to prophets in the Hebrew Bible, but they're not from the Hebrew Bible. All of this, as J. Rendell Harris argued late 19th century, all of this is characteristic of the use of a testimony book. Also worth noting that sometimes when he cites the text, it's in a different translation than his discussion of the text. So again, further evidence he has a testimony book. How old that testimony book might be, I can't say. Nothing, I can determine nothing about Cyril or Ephraim's, the Greek Ephraim sources, but both, as far as I can tell, are completely independent of Irenaeus and Hippolytus. So again, none of our early authors feel the need to argue for this schema, but they presuppose that their audience accepted the entirety of it. These are polemical texts in many cases, but what they're arguing is that yes, the Antichrist is going to come, but he's not going to come immediately, right? So these early texts all attempt to dampen apocalyptic fervor. The commentary on Daniel, for instance, cites two examples of bishops, one in Pontus in some Black Sea coast of Turkey, and the other Syria, where the bishop decides Christ's return is imminent, and he leads his flock out to the desert. They sell all their stuff, they get in all kinds of trouble. It's these sorts of movements that Hippolytus and some of our other authors appear to be discouraging. At any rate, I think we can conclude that already by the mid-2nd century, perhaps even a bit earlier, This schema is fully in place. It's attested in multiple parts of the Christian East. Its ultimate origins, I can't say. Maybe it's got some connection with the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135, where Bar Kokhba is identified as a messianic figure. I mean, there's clearly an attempt to find a place in Christian apocalyptic here for a Jewish Messiah. May have some connection that he also persecuted Christians and was widely believed to be a Messiah. I couldn't prove this. I'd never argued this in print. Maybe this represents the sorts of things that Paul was teaching his churches, which would have been transmitted orally, which would explain why our texts are consistent with 2 Thessalonians. But again, I don't think there's any decisive evidence that could be used to establish that. Just a possibility. All right, that's what I've got for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lamoreaux. That was fascinating. We can open this up now to Q&A. I have several questions that I am itching to answer, but I want to give people a chance. You can just do your, the reaction, the raise hand reaction, and I can call on you, or I can go ahead and just ask away. I'll venture one first. So, having spent a lot of time with Hippolytus, I'm embarrassed to say I never thought about where he was getting this stuff from. and I had also never considered and never knew some of these people who use the same schema. And I think you point out correctly that several of these people did not appear to accept Revelation as a canonical text, yet they are still using the same schema unabashedly and without qualification. And it's very widespread, which suggests that it goes back further. I'm wondering if you thought of the elders of Irenaeus, as a source for this. I mean, that's not, they could go back to the Bar Kokhba rebellion, conceivably, but that could be a way how Irenaeus and Hippolytus picked this kind of thing up, or do you think that would be too limiting a source?
I don't, for Irenaeus, yes. I think this is the most likely explanation of where he got this material. It's coming from Asia Minor, from Smyrna. It's something he learned at the feet of Polycarp and the other presbyters. For Hippolytus, I don't know, because I can't decide whether Hippolytus is an Eastern or Western figure. There's some good evidence to associate him with Rome, but there's also some really solid evidence to associate him with the Christian East. But I think until we can get some sort of certainty on the context within which he's writing, it's really difficult to talk about his sources other than the testimony book. And that applies, well, applies to the work on the Antichrist, less so to the commentary on Daniel, except to the extent that he's got the treatise on the Antichrist on his desk when he's writing the commentary on Daniel. In fact, in the commentary on Daniel, refers his readers back for more details to the earlier treatise.
Okay.
And this is hazardous ground, right? I mean, what Christianity looked like in late first century, really second century. I mean, I'm not sure I even want to tread that ground, but who knows? It could be. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very helpful. Thank you.
Maybe not back to the apostles, but within a generation of the apostles, possibly.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Other questions, Nathan?
Yeah, thanks, John. Really, really interesting, rich talk. Like Tom said, just raises a lot of really interesting questions about sources that maybe some of us haven't thought about so much. Certainly I haven't either. But I guess the same moment I want to ask a question, my dog decides it's time to play. But I guess my question is more of a methodological question. That is, I'm immediately thinking of the type of eschatologies and eschatological timelines that are popping up in places like Commodian and Lactantius as well. So it just raises the question of when we're dealing only with Greek sources, if we're only looking to Greek sources, How do you feel about the evidentiary trails that might be things that might be cleared up in other linguistic traditions? Since, I mean, as we know, they're entangled. And so just wondering your thoughts about, some of these, the stuff that's going on in Syriac, the stuff that's going on in Latin at the same time.
The Latin tradition is especially interesting in this regard because it's so much earlier than what we have in Syriac. There are definitely overlaps here and there. Commodius, for instance. There's one of the passages Hippolytus cites as if it's from scripture, but is probably Sibylline. We find the same tradition in Commodius. Many of our Latin authors are reading these Greek texts, but what I miss, so lots and lots of parallels. But we also have parallels in other Greek texts. Some of the stuff feeds into the Syriac tradition, but I can't really find in the Syriac tradition the schema existing in its full form, nor in the Latin tradition. You can't even really speak of an apocalyptic schema in the Latin tradition, just because there's so much diversity in how texts were interpreted. But there's certainly overlap, and I've got a translation of these works coming out. In the annotations to the translation, I'm really careful to track down all of the parallels I can find in both the Latin and the Syriac tradition. Also some stuff from the Christian Arabic tradition. But to date, I have not found this schema in its entirety anywhere other than in the Greek tradition or in works translated from Greek texts into other languages.
Thank you. Next is Alexei, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, John. I would like to go back to your slide with the list of the authors, and I think the third of them was Cyril, right?
Yes.
Yeah. He obviously shares the same schema, the same scenario, but he has at least one very important variation. For him, the Antichrist is a usurper of the Roman throne, and at the same time, for Jews, he will pretend to be a descendant of David. Just very interesting to me. He's not from the tribe of Gad in Cyril.
The tribe of Gad or the tribe of
He is
Dan?
not from that tribe. He is from Judah's tribe. He pretends to be from Judah's tribe because he need this for rebuilding the temple, according to Cyril.
Yeah,
this very interesting variation from this scenario, which we found probably only in Cyril.
Yes.
He's on one hand he is Jew or pretend to be Jew, and on another hand he is Gentile. He's an usurper of the empire.
Yes. In fact, the little horn as the successor to the Roman Empire and the 10 Kingdoms in the schema is really difficult to integrate with the identity of the Antichrist as a Jewish leader. All of our texts presuppose it, but those aspects of the doctrine sit not very well with one another. There are a lot of unique things about Cyril's presentation. So our earlier authors, like I mentioned, they believe the Antichrist takes his stand in the temple in Jerusalem, and he's there claimed to be God. Cyril, he feels extremely uncomfortable with this, and because it's impossible, in his view, to reconcile it with the statement of the Synoptic Gospels that not one stone will be left standing upon another. And at this point, he says, let's go look at the Temple Mount. Fortunately, there are stones still standing upon one another. Therefore, the temple has not yet actually been destroyed, and that prophecy will only occur presumably later. I'd have to check the text on the specific point. I don't recall that in the text, but it may very well be something I've missed. But I think you would agree that the overall schema is otherwise.
The overall schema is clear. Yeah, yeah. I can give you a reference if you want. It's 15:12 and 15:15.
Okay, I will take a look at that. Thank you.
I just check it right now.
Great, thank you.
Next question, Dr. Hill. I think you're muted. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, finally. Thank you very much, John. That was really interesting and enlightening. I have a question or comment, not really about the origin of the schema so much as the Jewish Antichrist part of it. I wonder if you've looked into simply the ongoing Jewish expectation of a Messiah who was not Jesus, which Christians looked at as, an expectation of an Antichrist. And that was probably, as you mentioned, strengthened by the Bar Kokhba situation, where he was another false Messiah, false Jewish Messiah, and who, from reports, persecuted Christians. Then also you had I think a strong influence from Marcion, possibly from Cerinthus as well. But Marcion, we know, had this expectation of a Jewish Christ. That is, the Creator's Christ was still to come, and he was seen as interpreting Old Testament prophecy in a manner that was like the Jews. So, like he sort of reiterated or reinforced a Jewish approach to the Old Testament, so-called Jewish approach. So you had this confluence between ongoing Jewish, non-Christian Christ expectation, Marcion's coming Jewish Antichrist, Jewish Christ, a real Christ for the demiurge, for the Creator, and then the Christian interpretation of all this is that person's going to be an Antichrist. And so, yes, they agreed. This person is coming. They're still looking for the Jews are still looking for a Messiah, but it's going to be the false Messiah.
Yeah. The first point, yes, this is something in the introduction. I tried to show. I knew this about Marcion. It never occurred to me to connect it, though. This is actually a really, really interesting point. Of course, Marcion's Christ is not going to be wicked in the
Successful.
sense of Antichrist, but it's going to be a somewhat sinister figure. I'm definitely going to have a look at that. Thank you. Excellent point.
John, could you, you may not be able to say much more, but I was fascinated by the two witnesses who are three witnesses, and one of them is John the Revelator or the Apostle, or could you say a few more words about that? And does it distinguish between John the disciple versus John of Revelation? And was this because he wasn't supposed to die, and like Enoch? I mean, what's going on there?
Right. So I think it's first attested in the 6th century, this tradition. Ultimately, it's a gloss on the passage in the gospel where Jesus said, some of you will still be here, right? Or some of you won't die. The tradition itself becomes universal in the Greek church. And so I think that the same logic that drove including Enoch has got to be behind the inclusion of John. Although, I mean, it's clear, when you read the text, it's clear that they're interpolations. I'm not sure that answered your question.
No, I was just, I assumed that this was just a little line or two and there wasn't much more to say about it, but I was fascinated. If there was more to say about it, I wanted to hear about it.
No, that's there's I think 3 or 4 passages in Pseudo-Hippolytus where the interpolation has been made.
Okay.
In fact, the English version of the text includes John, but the New Critical Edition puts it in square brackets. And
okay, thank you.
Not original to the text, which you could have told just from reading the text in Greek.
Yeah, okay, all right. Nathan, you have a question.
Yes. Maybe you could put the that initial slide, or not the initial, but the slide where you give the sequence of the authors that you're talking about. Do you see any patterns? You said that sometimes the Book of Revelation is used here and there, and sometimes it's not. No, I'm sorry. I guess I meant the slide with the list of authors here. This one. He said sometimes they seem to be using the apocalypse, maybe not structurally, but to fill in details, and sometimes they're not. The question I've been playing around with for a while is well, Tom wrote the book about it on the Eastern commentary tradition on the Book of Revelation, but I've been interested in kind of the silent reception of the Book of Revelation, even when it canonically is kind of out of the picture. It seems like people are still continuing to use it in some ways. And I'm just wondering, do you see any ways in which it continues to be present in fleshing out this apocalyptic timeline, and not? I have an article coming up on the reception of it, of Revelation in Syriac, and so I'm just wondering, there might be some similar parallels that are popping up in the Greek reception as well.
Yeah, probably the best example of something like that is in Cyril. Cyril explicitly rejects the canonicity of the apocalypse, but he's citing a doctrine that is well described in the apocalypse, not uniquely in the apocalypse, but he prefaces his discussion of this doctrine by the statement, okay, what I'm going to tell you, it's not from apocryphal text, or it's not from outside text, but it is from scripture, from the book of Daniel. I don't remember what the exact point of doctrine was, but I think he wants his readers to know that he's not secretly smuggling in the apocalypse through the back door. Hippolytus and Irenaeus, they both are heavy users of the apocalypse, clearly. Get to later texts, I mean, it's there. Even Romanus, he's got a line that explicitly cites it. Most of the other authors cite it occasionally, but it's not really until Philip Monotropos that we find significant heavy use of the apocalypse again. That's quite late, but I mean, we've got John of Damascus, 750. I mean, as early or as late as Ecumenius is the first extant Greek commentary, which is, I think, if I remember right, around 550. I mean, he's got to defend the canonicity of the apocalypse in the preface to his commentary. It's only Philip. It's only Philip that feels free to use it to a great extent, other than the earliest authors.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, that line from Cyril of Jerusalem, I think I knew it and then forgot it, but it's really interesting where you can kind of see people wrestling with material and saying what they're not using. Well, maybe they're still kind of drawing on things. There's one homily by John Chrysostom where he describes the heavenly Jerusalem. And there's not a bit of it from the Book of Revelation, but you got to wonder, like, would he be describing it in this kind of way had it not been for this, the shadow being cast from the Book of Revelation? It's hard to say, this kind of mimetic reception that I think we see in some of this early tradition. But anyway,
yeah,
thanks.
For sure.
John,
So Chrysostom does not accept the apocalypse? No,
I think I'm pretty sure that he mentions it once, but he doesn't actually use it. Cyril of Alexandria, the same. He actually says he receives it, but then he never uses it.
Yeah. And of course, it's not used even in the later church in liturgical stuff. So the Syriac church, for instance. Yeah.
Lorenzo texts saying he thanks you. He's in the French Alps and his internet is unstable.
Poor guy.
Perhaps we have time for one final quick question.
Actually, he has a question. Right after he complains about being in the Alps, he says, how do you fit the material about Antichrist in Pseudo-Methodius, which, as you know, was composed in Syriac and then swiftly translated into Greek and from Greek into Latin?
Yeah, this is not the only Antichrist tradition within the Greek church. There are various apocryphal texts in circulation. There's the last emperor, apocalyptic schema. It's later, but it becomes really popular among the later Byzantine authors. The distinction I'd say between these texts and all those other texts, as far as we can tell, this represents something like an official doctrine that was being taught from the pulpits in the church, whereas Pseudo-Methodius, the last emperor traditions, these are there, but they're circulating perhaps more on the outside of the official tradition. It's not to say people weren't interested in it, but these texts have an air of authority that those texts don't.
And then he also, Lorenzo also adds in the comment box, he says, perhaps also look to Pseudo-Methodius for an answer to the Ethiopian question that you raised in your talk as the successor to the Roman Empire.
Yeah. Okay. Good idea.
Well, would all of you join me in thanking Professor Lamoreaux for his talk? And Nathan, I guess I'll pass it over to you now.
Yeah. So thanks once again, John, for this really great talk, for this great kickoff, which is kind of a twofer, you know, the Revelation Reception Network and the Daniel Reception Network, in fact, today. I just wanted to give a little heads up as to what we have coming up in the future. If you guys have not seen the calendar already, next, in general, we're the first Thursdays of each month, occasionally a Monday. But November, we have Mo Laurentiu, who will be talking about Armageddon, the mountain meeting its Megiddo. Then we have Giovanni Di Russo from Harvard, who will be talking about perhaps the earliest translation of Revelation into Arabic, where he examines the book of Revelation as it appears in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. In December, that's at the beginning of December, then the week later, December 11th, we're going to have a book review session, and we're going to have 3 books reviewed by scholars with authors present to respond to the reviews. Expect blood. February 2nd, we have Lynn Huber, who was with us earlier. She had to leave a little bit early. And then we'll have Katarina Paulson from Lund University, Sam Pomeroy in April, on Eric Peterson and Carl Ludwig Schmidt on the Heavenly Jerusalem. In May, we have Benedikt Brunner from Mainz, who will be talking about the Heavenly Jerusalem in the Reformation commentaries of Bullinger, Cretreus, and Hoffmann. And then on June 1st, Colin McAllister will be talking about his recent book, Music in the Apocalyptic Mode, and he promises to give us material that is not in the book as well. So we have, I think, a fun season lined up. Finally, the last thing is do visit us on social media if you're on social media to get these updates. If you're not already on the listserv, simply go to tinyurl.com/revrecnet, and maybe I'll just type that out here. .com/revrec. That's wrong. Sorry about this, everyone. This is live television. If you go to that second link, you can get a link to the listserv, the email listserv, where I try to send that out once or twice per session, give updates about upcoming sessions. The other thing I would ask you to do is if there are new books or new interesting articles that deal with Revelation and its long interpretation over time, please simply send it to the listserv. Join the listserv, and then just send a link with a quick overview or a quick blurb about the book, just to keep it in everybody's sight. Interesting books that are coming out, and we may pick some of them in the future for a review session. Also, if you're writing anything about Revelation, you want us to see it, you do not need to send it to me or to any of our organizers. Just send it to the listserv, and will automatically be distributed. I think that's about it for now. Thanks everyone for joining. Please come back in a month. That will be November the 6th. And expect the emails and follow us on social media. Thanks so much.